Good afternoon. Welcome to our third card class for the Great Australian Craft Show 3. I'm Becky Muir from Beccy's Place, and today, or this afternoon, we're going to be creating a little card featuring the Slugs and Snails set of stamps and matching dies. Sorry about the glare from that. The overhead lights are a bit bright. So we're using this set of stamps today and the matching dies. Now I'll have these available, they're currently available in the store, but if you wait until 2 o'clock, they will be on sale as a bundle. So they'll go in there for a beat the clock sale. That sale just lasts half an hour. So from 2 o'clock this afternoon, they'll be available to purchase at a reduced price for the bundle. Okay, so this is what we'll be making this afternoon, this little card. It's a little window card, so it has a little window cut into the front, and when you open it, it has a little bit of a pop-up feature there. So the flag at the bottom, the sentiment flag, pops up as you open the card. So that's what we'll be making this afternoon. It's just an A5 size, so half a piece of A4 cardstock. Okay, so first of all, you need to decide on which image you want to use and colour it in. I've coloured and cut out each of the little characters from the set. I used one already in this card here, so I'm just going to, I'll choose this one. He's my favourite, so I'll use this one in today's card, but just colour in whatever choice of mediums you like and cut one of them out ready for use. Okay, so I'll set those aside. This one. And you're going to require your card blank, which, as I said, is A5 in size, so half an A4. And you can either have an A-frame card with the opening at the top or just a sideways card. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you, your personal preference. So we're just going to have a side opening card for today's tutorial. You'll also need some pattern paper. I have a 6x6 sheet of pattern paper here. It's double-sided, so I like to make the most of both sides of my pattern paper, and we're going to be using quite a lot of, well, the majority of the pattern paper on today's card. So I'll show you just a little bit of a trick that I use when I'm cutting my paper to size. What I do is lay the paper out on my card blank with the border that I'd like to save. So I've got a little bit at the top here and a little bit along the side. And all I do is use my pencil just to mark about the same distance either end there. So that's how much I'll need to trim off. And instead of measuring it all and spending all that time, it's just easier to place a little mark. And then when you come in with your trimmer, you can just lay that mark, measure it along the side up here where I made the mark, and then just chop those edges off. Same for the bottom. Oops, sorry about that. And then you know that that piece will be perfectly cut to your card front. So the perfect size for the card front. And I actually might use this on the card front this time. I think the other one we used the lighter blue. We're going to make use of these offcuts too, so don't get rid of those. You still need those for other parts of the card. Okay, so we're going to cut our window first from the front, and I'm just using a couple of square nesting dies. It doesn't really matter what brand you use, whatever you've got's fine. You could also use punches if you wanted to as well, some nesting punches. If you don't have any of those, then a craft ruler and knife is also okay, or a trimmer. All right, so to get those in the right place, we're going to just add a tiny little bit of tape to hold it in place. I tend to use just a little bit of double-sided tape. You can just use a little bit of washi tape on the outside if you prefer. It doesn't really make much difference. So place your pattern paper on top of your card blank, wherever you want it positioned. Remembering that we have that little border. So line it up along the bottom and then along the side. And just hold those in place. All right, open it up and Grab some washi tape again. So the washi tape will hold our die in place so that it doesn't move when we put it through the machine. Okay, so we start with a smaller die. I have two square dies, one's large and one's a bit smaller. Start with the smaller one and place your window, or place the die where you would like the window to be on the card. Now I'm removing the center of the window, so I don't want this part here, so I tend to add the washi tape on the side that I'm not going to use, and that way if it does happen to tear, it doesn't really matter because you're discarding that part anyway or using it for something else. All right, so we've got our washi tape in place, and then I'll just run it through my die cutting machine. Make sure you open out your card blank before you do that. And that die will cut through both layers of the pattern paper and also the cardstock underneath. So you can get rid of those pieces. Now, take the pattern paper off. Set the card blank aside, and what we're going to do is actually use the larger die now. So line it up with the window that we've just cut. You can just see the paper edge, and we're going to enlarge that window so that will give us a small border around the window as well. So I'm using the same pieces of washi tape. They've still got some tack on them, so that's no problem. So back through our die cutting machine. And that will give the same little white border around the edge. So just removed a little piece from the edge. You can save that for another card if you really want to. All right, let me take off our washi tape. Let's set those off to the side now. And then we have our pattern paper that should fit perfectly around our window. So our frame should match up beautifully, just like that. All right, so we'll attach those. I'm just going to apply some double-sided tape. You can use glue if you prefer. Use something nice and sturdy and apply a little bit of adhesive, whatever you're using, just around the edges of the window as well. So right under the window here, just to keep it in place. It'll hold it down nice and securely. Now, when you're applying your pattern papers to the front of your cardstock, have a look at the border that you've left. Try and get the three sides to be equal. So lay it in place, don't press it down yet, and then hold your finger onto one of the bottom corners, and then you can pivot this piece of paper in place until you find the right location for it. That's the easiest way I have found to do that. All right, so press it into place. And then we have our window. Sometimes the die cuts leave some edges. You can get into these edges with a little file or something like that if you find that it leaves quite a lot behind. Okay, so we have our window cut. Now, the next thing we need to do is, from some of those offcuts that we still had, is we're going to cut a strip of pattern paper from the offcuts. So we've got this larger piece here. We're going to cut a strip that measures, let me just look at my notes here, 4 1/8 by 1 inch. So 4, yeah, that's fine. 4 1/8 by 1 inch wide. When I'm measuring a long ways here, there's not a lot to balance on the edge, so I just use this the guidelines along the inside here. If you line up the edge with that guideline, it'll cut in the right place. Okay, so 4 1/8 by 1 inch, and that's going to go across the bottom like that. So move those out the way. Now, we have some smaller pieces of cardstock that I've pre-cut already. This one measures 4 1/8 by 3/4, and that gets layered over the top of that pattern paper that we just cut. And this is where we're going to stamp our sentiment. So I've chosen a couple of sentiments out of the set already. It has various ones that you can mix and match. I'm going to use the Hay Slick over here. And I'm just going to stamp that on one side. So just ink up the little stamp and wherever you want it on there. So I'm going to have mine off to one end. All right. Pack up the stamp. Okay. Now we just layer those together. So once it's had a little bit of a chance to dry, just add some adhesive to the back. And then layer that in the center of your piece of cardstock, or your pattern paper. And then that gets layered across the front of the card. However far you want it from the window is fine. Doesn't really matter. Now just eyeball it. You don't have to measure. Use the pattern paper if it has an obvious pattern in it as a guide. It doesn't have to be straight. It has to just look straight. So that's what's important. Don't worry too much if it's not perfect. It's more important that it looks straight. Okay. So there we go. We have our card front pretty much done. If you wanted to add more embellishments or some embellishments to the front of this cardstock, or to the front of the card, you can. Some dots or flowers or whatever you want to add is fine. I tend to make fairly simple cards. I'm quite happy with fairly simple cards. That's really up to you. Okay, so to create the center of the card, what we need to do is have our little character that we've colored and cut already. And he's going to go in the inside of our card. So to place him correctly, we put him inside the card, and depends on how much you want visible from the front. So if you just want his little eyes peeping over the top, you can place him down quite low like that. But if you want more of his face to appear, then just slide him along. However much you want appearing in that window is fine. So that's totally up to you. I'm going to just use a little bit of glue to glue him in place. So that will allow me a little bit of leeway to move him around as I glue that down. So I'll just put a bit of glue on the back of the little snail. And then place him into our card. So maybe move him up a little bit. I'll just make sure he's straight when you open the card. Perfect. All right, so just hold him down, push him down for a little bit, let the glue dry. You can use double-sided tape if you prefer, it's up to you. Now what I'm going to do, we've talked about the grounding in our colouring. We're also going to do a bit of grounding. Very simple way to ground an image like this is to grab a black pen, and all I'm going to do is add some spots and dots. I'll show you the sample card. I've already done some spots and dots here, just with a black pen, and that just gives him somewhere to exist, basically. It gives him a bit of ground to crawl or slide along. Now just little circles and dots, it doesn't matter, don't be too particular. So a combination of little circles, black solid dots. Let me put that up a bit closer to the camera so you can see what I'm doing. So you can see just a little bit of pen work, basic spots and dots, nothing exciting. Go right up to the edge of the image. And we're going to concentrate quite a few of them directly underneath. And then just a few out to either side. Don't worry about it too much on either side. So we're going to go all the way out to the side, but just a few sparse ones. Okay, a few more down this end. Let me show you that a bit closer. So it's fairly basic, fairly simple thing to do, but just adds a little bit underneath him. Okay, now for that center flag, what we are going to do is take another strip of white cardstock. This one is 3 1/8 in length by 3/4 of an inch. So 3 1/8 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch, or I've written on the back of it just so I remember, 8 centimeters by 1.8 centimeters. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine, but about that is what you're looking for. And that's going to sit down here. All right, so I'm going to use this flag punch. Now, these big punches are designed so that they will hold a certain size of cardstock. As you can see, mine's too small. The way I get around that is first of all, I turn it over and I have a look to see that my cardstock has come out the other side. So I can see either end, either corner of my cardstock, that side. So I know it's far enough into the punch. And then I turn it over and hold it in place. And then I center it between these two sides. So I center my piece of cardstock, what looks quite centered to me, and then I punch, and then you have your flag. Okay. You could draw the lines in and line it all up that way, but that's just another quick way to do that. So I'll set that aside, and we're going to add, we're going to add another stamp on this one, and I have chosen my favorite sentiment stamp out of this set is this one here, Booyah. Booyah, it's your birthday. I think that's pretty fun. So we're going to stamp that onto our sentiment flag, just in the same way. So load up the stamp, stamp that down as straight as you can. And remember, when you're stamping, it's as much about the time that you allow that to set as it is the pressure that you apply. Okay, so give it time for the ink to transfer from the stamp onto the cardstock. All right, so we have that all stamped out. Now, the next step is to create a background for this, a mat, basically. So we have these, we still have a few pieces of pattern paper offcuts. So what we're going to do is just create a little mat for this, to just make it a little bit wider. So you need to cut an offcut to 1 inch wide. So just probably cut a little bit off here, not much by the look of it. So a 1 inch strip, just a tiny bit off one side. And as you can see, I haven't got a lot of leftovers either, so I try to tend to get as much as I can out of my cardstock and my pattern paper as I go. Decide which side you'd like facing up, so I might go with the brown. And before you trim it down, use your punch again, your flag punch, or whatever you used the first time. Okay, so we have that cut, and then layer them together, and then you can trim that back. So I might use a bit of glue this time so I could wiggle it around for a little bit. Okay. All right, so measure it from this side, center it from this side. Get it just where you want it. All right, then we can trim off. You can cut it off with scissors. I usually use my trimmer. Trim off that excess little bit. All right, so it's trimmed down to size, and that should fit nicely now on our card blank, on our inside the card. All right, so we now have to do the little piece that pops this up. So I have, again, another little piece of cardstock. This is the smallest piece of cardstock. It measures 2.5 inches by 1/2 inch wide, or 6.3 centimeters by 1.2 centimeters. So grab your scoreboard, place this horizontally on the scoreboard, and score starting at the left-hand edge at 1/2 inch, 1.5 inches, and 2 inches. Okay, and then each of those are mountain folds. So that means fold backwards. So they're all mountain folds. All right. Now, in this first section, so before this first score line, we're going to add a little bit of glue, or you can add double-sided tape if you prefer. It doesn't really matter. Something nice and strong that will hold it in place. And wherever you want this to be, this is going to be the support for the sentiment flag. So starting in that center score line of your card, just lay this little piece of cardstock down, flush with the center score line, and evenly with the base of the card. All right, so we just lay it in place down there. All right, give it a chance to dry. So if you use tape, it'll dry pretty much straight away. All right, and then bend it backwards, and we're going to apply a little bit of adhesive to that very last section. All right, so back here. Now, what you need to do now is on this, you've got your first score line down here, your second score line here, and your third score line. So bend it on the second score line. Okay, I hope you can see that. So this is the 1.5 inch score line. Bend it there. So we've got our glue facing upward, and all I'm going to do now is close the card. And I'm going to let that glue set and take hold just inside there. And what that will do is, make sure it's holding in place, is create that little pop-up section for my sentiment. Okay, you can see how that works. As you close it, it bends down, and as you open it, it pops up. So when the sentiment flag is secured on there, which is the next step, it moves with the card. All right, so next step is to apply some adhesive just on this panel here. So again, I'm going to use a little bit of glue. And I'm going to lay our sentiment along the edge. Make sure it's not hanging down over the base of your card. You don't want it popping out at the bottom. And then hold that in place until the glue has a bit of a chance to dry. Okay, it doesn't take long. It's quicker with tape, but then you can't sort of move it around if you put it in the wrong place. All right, and that's it. Our pop-up section is done. So that will, you'll see as that closes, it will lay flat. And that's pretty much it. It's a pretty cute card, and it's exciting for especially little kids who receive something that's fun like this and has a bit of a pop-up section. So it's an interactive card that's lots of fun and quite easy to make. So you can adjust those middle sections if you wanted to. You could make that into a card that sits this way, and even use some of those little characters against that pop-up section, and so that when you open the card they would pop up. So there's lots of different ways you can make these pop-up cards using just that simple little piece of cardstock. You can cut the cardstock from the card base, so make a couple of slits and stand it up, but then you end up with a sort of a hole in the card that you need to cover with something else. But that's basically it. Nice simple card with a bit of a wow factor, which is always nice. Feel free to embellish it with a few extra bits and pieces if you'd like to. Now, tomorrow we have our last colouring class for this show, and that will start at 10 o'clock, and we'll be using the Lakeside set of stamps, and we'll also be doing our 1 o'clock card making class using the long haul set of stamps, and that one is going to be another fun card with a bit of a slider action. So thank you very much for joining me. Don't forget our sale, our bundle on Slugs and Snails starts at about 2 o'clock. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.